Okay, so welcome to our very prestigious panel of experts giving us insight from around various parts of the world today, which we'll hear about shortly. So I'm Tony Jones from One Nucleus, and it's our pleasure each year to put together an On Helix conference. Up until last year, that had been a physical gathering in Cambridge, UK. Clearly, the pandemic and restrictions meant we had to go virtual with our conference last year and again this year. But actually, there's been some upsides that we've managed to harness. And one major one has been the ability to say, well, let's have a discussion about topics that are common to all of us, irrespective of geography. So leveraging these platforms means we can then assemble a group like this, right the way from Southern Hemisphere to Northern and East to West, and actually have a look at what's working, what isn't, what should companies and individuals wanting to undertake in the case of this particular session, we're looking at clinical trials, and what to look out for in ecosystems and make those decisions. So I'm looking forward to the discussion and hearing people's views. But first of all, as a kickoff, I shall go around the group, ask them to introduce themselves and set the scene a little bit about what they think is working well and the role they and their organizations play. So perhaps we can start with LaQuinta.
Thank you, Tony. LaQuinta Jernigan here. I'm the Executive Vice President of MD Group. MD Group is an organization that supports the clinical research industry by providing solutions to patients that increase accessibility to clinical trials and helps engage them throughout the process. So we provide services such as patient travel, patient reimbursements, and stipend management, and in-home clinical health services. So bringing the clinical visit to the home for the patient. Our parent company is located in the UK. However, we have offices scattered across the US as well. And I sit out of our Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina office, which is a wonderful location for clinical research. It has lots of sponsors locally, CROs, labs. So it just makes it very easy to partner with organizations on the ground and bringing solutions to patients throughout not just the US, but globally as well.
Excellent, thank you. Catherine, first I'll come to you next.
Thanks, Tony, sorry. So I'm Catherine Davidson. I head up the life science team at Midas, which is Manchester's inward investment agency. And our role is to attract and support companies to establish in the region. Primarily, we help businesses because we act as a facilitator to connect to the wider ecosystem. And Manchester as a life science location probably has 5 key factors that make it an ideal location for clinical trials. So the first of which is our infrastructure. Greater Manchester is unique in the UK in that we are a devolved city region, metropolitan region, and we have control over our £6 billion health and social care budget. So as a result of this, all of our primary, secondary, tertiary care, health and social care organisations have all come together under one umbrella organisations with the primary aim of giving our population greater access to new therapeutics, new treatments, and so exposing them to more clinical trials. Probably the second factor is our population. We have a large population of 2.8 million people, but it's also a very sick population. So we've got a higher concentration of and higher incidence of chronic diseases throughout the region. But we're also a very diverse population. So any trials that take place in Greater Manchester, we are confident that they're representative and data will be transferable, internationally. With data and data analysis and real world evidence being much more prominent and much more sought after for clinical trials, Manchester is a leading digital region. So we're home to the first NHS Global Digital Exemplar site, which is Salford Royal. And this was the first trust in the NHS to have a fully integrated care record. But as a result of COVID, all of Greater Manchester's 2.8 million population now have an integrated care record, which makes that real world evidence accessible to companies that want to set up clinical trials here. The fourth factor is our local expertise. So, we have all that clinical expertise in and around chronic diseases. We've already demonstrated our use of real world evidence because Manchester was the location for the first fully electronic random control trial, which was the Salford Lung Study. We've got the highest performing NIHR region across the UK. So we recruit in terms of recruiting patients and population to target. So sorry, I'm waffling here. So we've got the highest performing NIHR clinical research network in the UK in terms of recruiting patients to time and target. So at 88%, we're more than 10% higher than the closest region. And probably the most important thing is the extent of integration and collaboration across Greater Manchester. We are all our assets are very, very closely located together, which means that our NHS trusts are co-located alongside our universities, which are co-located alongside industry with our science parks, all within a 1 mile stretch. And this makes collaboration between clinical research partners so much more easily and so much more accessible. So that in a nutshell is Midas, Manchester, and our benefits for clinical trials.
Thanks, Catherine. So I'll come to Sandrine next.
Thank you, Tony. I'm Sandrine Lawage, Director of Business Development at Advanced Clinical. We are a full service CRO in Adelaide, Australia, and we manage clinical trials for biotech companies around the world, including Europe and the US. We provide services from study design, protocol writing, data management, analysis, and we work with dedicated phase 1 units as well as hospital sites around Australia and New Zealand. A lot of sponsors come to Australia for several reasons. The regulatory pathway for phase 1 trials is one of the fastest in the world, and we provide high quality data that's acceptable to regulatory agencies around the world. And there's an attractive tax incentive for small companies where companies can get over 40% back for every dollar spent. So a lot of biotechs come to Australia, use their data for larger trials around the world, and use Australia as a jump into the real world.
Thank you. We come to Christoph. No, we're not hearing you.
Maybe now you can hear me.
We can hear you now.
Okay, yeah. So thanks to the iPhone technology, I'm back in the conversation. I'm sorry. Yes, we are really excited about the opportunity to explain who we are. So I work for the Foreign Direct Investment Agency here in the south of France. So you asked me if I'm happy. Yes, it's summer. We are back. Restaurants are full and we can enjoy a day properly with a terrace and a cafe at the sun. So the idea is to explain you briefly who we are. As a foreign direct investment agency, we have foreign companies to look for an investment here in the south of France, and especially companies in the healthcare. Regarding to the expertise and the things that we can offer for company, it's pretty wide. But in terms of clinical trial, that you have to know that in France, it's a huge trend which is pushed by the authorities, and we will take the benefit of this trend, which is more and more efficient for companies that are looking for a way to have an access to patients and also hospitals. So we literally offer I would say a window in one single point between all the hospitals from the Italian border to the Spanish border. So thanks to a network which is called Europe Biomed, which is the tech cluster dedicated to healthcare here in the south of France. And things that you need to all keep in mind, it's quite simple. France is ranked in Europe as the number 4 for clinical trials, the second for cancer trials, and also here there's a huge expertise in rare disease. And we are convinced about the fact that on top of the hospitals mentioned and described previously, Marseille and the Provence is an amazing gateway between different populations around the globe. It's a real gene pool with populations from Africa, Asia, North America, France, and also European countries. And it's clearly, for me and for us, an asset for companies that could really look for a way to test some medicine in a population which is not only French, but global. And we'll be more than available to interact with you all after, but in some words, these are the main assets that we can provide to companies.
Thank you, Christoph. Yelena.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yep, loud and clear.
Perfect, yeah. So my name is Elena Palaeva. I'm a business development manager for NIHR, which is National Institute for Health Research here in England. We cover England, and developed nations have their own counterparts in that. And NIHR's offer to industry is quite broad as well, but to highlight, we are the biggest funder of clinical research in the UK, but equally, we have the funding that we receive from the Department of Health and Social Care as a government agency. We spend more than half of it on what we call research infrastructure, and that's people, systems, and facilities where clinical research takes place. And so the services that we offer to industry, some of them are free, called signposting service and study support service. These underpin the help we provide in finding relevant collaborators, expertise, access to patients, advice on study, funding, and trial management, and also increasingly now patient data. As Catherine mentioned, patient data is extremely important, and we are increasingly collating, access to rich longitudinal data as well. UK is a great place for clinical research for a number of reasons, and I'd like to highlight the workforce that is highly skilled and dedicated to research, but also the innovation base that is stemming from world-leading universities and translational research. Our regulators are world-renowned as well, like medical MHRA and agencies like NICE. So I believe UK is a great place for clinical research because it integrates the collaboration between industry, academia, NHS, regulators, but also is underpinned by the buy-in and commitment from the government to invest into life science industry.
Good stuff. And now we go way north.
Great, thank you, Tony. Pleasure to be here. So my name is Niall Kerrigan. I'm the Business Development Manager for an organization called Calgary Economic Development up north in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And so our organization really is a full service concierge desk really for investors looking to establish a presence in Calgary. And my role specifically is to work with the life sciences community and work with companies that are looking to expand into our market and establish a presence here in Calgary and take advantage of the wonderful research assets that we have here in the growing and emerging life sciences ecosystem. So specific to clinical research, our province, Alberta, has really developed a strong reputation in Canada as a destination and a really efficient jurisdiction to conduct clinical trials. And really, it's built on the backs of the way our health care system is structured in Alberta. It's quite unique in Canada, where we have a single integrated healthcare authority for our entire province, which covers a population of 4.4 million. So the data catchment for that large of a healthcare system is actually one of the larger ones in the world, and certainly the largest in Canada. So this makes for a quite rich environment for clinical research, and especially clinical research that relies on access to high quality health data records and data repositories. So I think that's a very unique advantage in Alberta that's made it a really unique ecosystem in Canada. And actually, Alberta has the highest number of clinical trials per capita in Canada as a result of the perceived efficiencies in the province. And so in addition to that, I would say what really supports our clinical research infrastructures are our top-notch research institutions here, which are excel in the health and life sciences, and particularly in Calgary, excellence in the oncology field. I think that's an area where we're going to see a lot of growth in our city. We're currently building a brand new comprehensive cancer center, which we're delighted to have come online in 2023, which will be the largest one in Canada and second largest in North America once it's completed. And then, the other prominent offering to companies, we really have a lot of scalable solutions for companies and industry partners that are looking to conduct clinical research. So we have, a full service suite dedicated to supporting early stage health tech ventures to really reduce the costs and increase the efficiencies in conducting clinical research within our jurisdiction. And then scaling all the way up to programs and organizations that are able to leverage the rich data sets and the unique healthcare environment to conduct real world evidence trials in Alberta. So I say those are the highlights for me and for our jurisdiction, Tony.
Thanks, Niall. And then we'll go way south again. Sandra.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sandra Heck. I'm representing the government of South Australia, so the same place where Sandrine from Advanced Clinical is from. So I'm specifically representing the health and medical industry part of the Department for Trade and Investment. So the role of our department, very similar to some of our colleagues here from around the world, is facilitating and supporting companies really looking for partnering, for setting up in South Australia, for collaborations with industry or academia, and of course for conducting clinical trials. We are a city-state with about 1.2 million people, with Adelaide as its capital. And we're really small enough to be accessible and big enough to be complex. And I don't know if you've read about it, but we've just been voted again as one of the most livable cities in the world, actually ahead of Melbourne and Sydney this time. Sandrine already mentioned the Australian advantage, but I just want to quickly recap that most trials here are going to regulatory agencies around the world. So mostly the data is submitted to the FDA. So the clinical trials conducted here can be submitted around the world. We've got a very time-efficient regulatory process, and we've got comparatively low cost, especially for companies that are eligible for the R&D tax incentive, which is up to 43.5% tax back. So that's a very, very good incentive. What I wanted to mention, what I think, especially in South Australia, is that we actually have a complete end-to-end ecosystem here. So not only government, industry, and academia, but we have everything from the research side with our new South Australian Health and Medical Research Institute, and a whole breadth of service providers with Advanced Clinical as a CRO, dedicated healthy volunteer sites, oncology sites, bioanalysis, ethics, and actually also GMP manufacturing, both for small molecules and biopharmaceuticals, which is actually also eligible for R&D tax incentive. And another point that's interesting is that we have a big focus in South Australia on AI and data capabilities. So South Australia has recently managed to get Google here, Amazon, and Accenture, and they're actually all interested in working in the health space. So I think that's something, a whole area of data, AI, and health that will really grow a lot more. And I guess we've been actually very lucky, and I just wanted to highlight that we've been pretty much unaffected by COVID. So our clinical trials, our normal working life has been going on here, except for I think 3-day lockdown that we had, that we weren't allowed to leave the house. We've been really here having business as usual. So thank you for giving me the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Well, welcome everyone. And actually, that's quite a nice way that you've brought up the issue of COVID and the pandemic and the impact, because I guess much as different parts of the world and we've been impacted and governed differently, and we could probably spend a whole hour just talking about what's actually worked or not worked. But I'm just thinking, in a sense, particularly for yourself, LaQuinta, you mentioned about the sort of home visits and that sort of decentralized operations in clinical trials. So I guess that's going to be something in the future when we look more at chronic diseases. And it isn't all going to be done in acute settings and controlled settings of hospitals. So, I mean, the impact of COVID around how you operated, how did that play out? Or is it playing out?
So COVID had a huge impact on our business. Prior to COVID, the thought of conducting clinical research in the home wasn't one that was widely used. And it was only kind of sprinklings of those instances. And then when COVID hit, it became, everyone's hot idea. Let's try to continue these trials. And how do we do that when patients aren't willing to travel to a hospital site and when hospitals are overwhelmed? And so the answer was do it in the home. So COVID allowed our home health services to really take off in a way that it never had before. And I think that, governments, especially, I guess I'll speak to the US since that's where I am, the US made it very easy for us to make that transition by putting new orders in place that allowed nurses with certain licenses to travel cross borders across many states in light of COVID, that allowed you to amend your protocol without formally submitting it for review if it was just for allowing the in-home element to your trial. So it made sponsors, they were able to very quickly shift gears and bring in these in-home solutions. So it was very COVID, it accelerated that part of our business. Now, as far as the other hurdles that present itself with lockdowns and shutdowns, I mean, there were those issues because with the U.S., the U.S. is quite large. And one of the benefits of the US for clinical research is that we have such a diverse population, but with that diversity in people comes diversity and states as well. And so one of the things that you really had to navigate during COVID were each state had different rules and regulations about what was allowed. You would have one state in a shutdown that you're conducting research in, but another state wasn't. And maybe you had states side by side where you were hoping to utilize nurses from one to the other, but the shutdowns and the lockdown rules were different. And so you had to know the regulations, and you have to with clinical research of every state in the US. And that's true before COVID, but it became a little bit more of a hurdle during COVID as those regulations were quickly changing constantly every day. But I do think that one of the key elements to succeeding in the US, not just for COVID, but outside of COVID, is really having good partners and local governments to understand what the regulations are, how to navigate them, and how to prepare for any changes that are going to come about from them.
And I think that's a really salient point. It isn't just about what's, yes, we've all dealt differently or had to go through COVID, but it's actually what has it taught us about going forward in the way that we will adapt the way we operate. I don't know, maybe I'll come to Elena this time. Do you see with sort of thinking about infrastructure and how to enable clinical research within the NHS? Will there be a legacy to this, I guess, is my question.
Probably yes. I guess from the 25,000 people that the NIHR funds on the ground to do research, of course, many of them were redeployed to the front line, and the research portfolio that we had was affected. But when the restart framework was introduced, the priority was given to urgent public health research around COVID, be that vaccines or medicines. And of course, the results that were coming out from there received global recognition. And within NIHR, also patient recruitment centers opened just around the same time. And these are 5 centers across England that are dedicated to commercial research. And they were then able, as LaQuinta was saying, do more remote work and fully digital trials as well. And I think the legacy of that going digital and virtual will definitely stay on. Also, the regulators worked closely with the NHS and sites to start trials very quickly. So I think that's speeding up of research is also something that we'd like to continue, of course, but for it to be consistent and sustainable as well.
Yeah, I guess it is that challenge now where there's an expectation outside of the sector that everything can be done at this pace forever, which you can't work at that rate as a sector and not burn out is my guess. But I guess I'm thinking as well, as we go down that track and what the legacy might be and more remote engagement, because maybe people got more comfortable with that. That brings up the issue about moving data around. And access to data came up in a couple of the introductions. Maybe I'll come to Christoph first on this about accessing patient data and what you can do with that doing clinical trials in France or particularly in Provence.
Sure. Go ahead, I interrupt you. I'm sorry.
No, so I'm just thinking, it'd be interesting to hear maybe from around I was going to say around the table, but around my screen, how the data access works in different places, and because I know you've got to build up that trust with the general public to engage in this so that we will look after it, and that's stronger in some locations than others. But what's your perception of that in France?
I think and the perception is strongly linked with what we went through. I mean, with the pandemic situation and the fact that we had literally to stop everything in one day. Not allowed to go in the office, not allowed to kiss your own mother, your family. So trapped in something that was just crazy. And I would say the access to patient, and also what is quite interesting for me is to understand how a country, my country and our region, finally can be resilient. We literally open our eyes on the fact that we have some assets, and we had the chance to work on this. I can eventually say three things that could work on the legacy, and what we understood about the COVID situation and the pandemic situation, and how finally it helped us to, I would say, to dynamize our image in France and also in Europe. We just learned about the fact that our country has been ranked number 2 after the US in the COVID test, with more than 77 authorization tests, literally authorized by our authority with a fast track to understand where are the different problems in the country, where are the people, how we can securize the different ecosystems and people. So there's a question of efficiency, and we literally understood that we can be efficient when we are right in front of the wall and we need to skip that wall. The second point for me is the pandemic situation helped us to put our expertise on a global scale, on a French scale, mainly because we have the hospital and also the clinical trials that we can drive here in the south of France with something which is called infectious disease. We are here in the south of France and in Marseille with someone which is way more and more famous, the doctor which is famous in France. All the infectious disease expertise, part of the expertise in infectious disease is based here in Marseille. So we understood that we have an asset located here since more than 20 years, and we can, literally grab it and push it as an advantage on how we can attract FDI, how we can help companies to land here, to test their innovation, and also to prepare the after COVID and maybe the next COVID, the 21, 22, 23, we never know. And so the local expertise for us was something we discovered, but we rediscovered our expertise. Last and not least, we understood, because here it's a place where you can also have the location of innovation project, location of clinical trials, but we also have lands dedicated to produce. We literally understood that Europe, France, and the south of France need to be back in all the production process. We need to have plants. So in all the foreign direct strategy we had in mind, we literally try to bring back some industrial players in the lands that were not only dedicated for technology, but also for industrial plants and people that need to produce in Europe for French people and for European people. So what is quite interesting for us to discover is we can be efficient, we can literally rediscover our expertise, and we literally need to be back on the track on production from France, from Europe, and by Marseille, and what ex-Marseille can bring to our ecosystem. I don't know if my answer is clear, but this is exactly what we learned from and where we need to go now.
I think that what I see as a recurring theme is everywhere learning about how to be resilient. And I guess going forward, it's like, are we better placed to cope with this now than we would have, obviously than we were 18 months or even 2 years before. But just thinking in terms of, Sandra, you mentioned there'd been, sort of minimal impact in some respects from COVID because you kept it under control and not had lockdowns. What was the learning from a cluster that didn't have that?
Well, we still had a lot of the effects, like not able to travel, the same thing that, like Pinter said, about different routes in different states. So our neighboring state, Victoria, was very heavily affected. So I guess one big thing is that we can't travel, we can't go to conferences, we have sponsors not being able to come and visit where they might want to conduct their trials. I think all that we went through as well. And I think Sandrine might be the right one to talk a bit more about the data and the actually on the ground impacts of what they had to deal with on very sort of short timeframes of working out how to do the audits, how to how to get the patients in. I mean, I'm amazed. I think the digitization has just exploded just on normal business processes, but particularly in the clinical trials. And I think the knowledge of clinical trials around the population has increased immensely. So hopefully that will mean higher participation rates in, I think the awareness is much higher around the general population. But yes, we've been very lucky that we were able to keep running, and we had a lot of interest of companies conducting the trials here. So there's a lot of upskilling of people and getting new workforce that our sector had to solve.
Yeah. And Sandrine, on that sort of data point in terms of access to patient data and be able to move data around, I guess, because most trials, or a lot of them, will become multi-center and in fact international. How do you see that from a provider's perspective?
Yeah, we've had trials interstate where we couldn't actually travel, and data is collected electronically, and we can see it on the screen, but it's different than, you know, seeing the real patient. I mean, Australia, we do realize we're very lucky, and it has been very popular for clinical trials around the world. Other trials have been on hold, so clients come to Australia to continue their trial. By now, everybody knows what a clinical trial is, and I think that, as Sandra mentioned, it has really heightened the interest to participate and for people to realize that you know, clinical trials are important for not just, you know, the COVID vaccine, but in general. The data is we do provide electronic sort of capture, but because Australia's been quite good, we haven't really had to use it. But the availability of new systems, and people come up with creative ideas of new ways to manage data, to come up with home visits, to like home dosing, has been incredible. And I think it really boosted the industry around the world. And made the world smaller, really. It doesn't matter now anymore whether you are, you know, a client in the US or in Europe and do your trials in Australia or the other way around. And I think that's really boosted the industry.
I guess I'd never really thought of it, actually, and it's interesting you mentioned about that sort of the technologies coming through and the innovation that's allowing this if you need to use it, and having that remote monitoring. And I guess I'd like to come to Niall in a second, but first I'm going to come back to Catherine. So these answers were coming through. It's the collaboration with the innovation base, and I think Niall, you referred to them as research assets and bringing things through. But Catherine, you talked about the clustering and the proximity, but also being a kind of a sick population locally. And I'm just sort of intrigued in a sense as to, does that conversation come up when people are thinking, where do I put the clinical trial? I mean, feel free for anyone to answer. I was throwing it at Catherine as a starting point, given you raised it. But is that a factor in where people choose to go? Is like, how ill is the population?
Well, if you consider, I mean, generally clinical trials tend to focus around where they have the partners and where they have the clinical partners. So, you know, in Manchester, we have the Christie Hospital, which is a leading cancer centre. You know, it's one of the top 50 cancer centres in the world. So they run in excess of 400 trials a year. So the fact that we're serving a large population that has this, that's affected by this chronic condition, is very indicative of the fact that they probably do locate to where you have an appropriate population for, you know, for the topic or for the clinical trial in question. So, you know, that to me would be particular evidence of that. But also, you know, going back to COVID, what we find in Manchester is that, you know, because we have this sick population, we've particularly been running trials to see, well, you know, how vaccines impact in terms of patients that are already sick, in order to prioritize patients for vaccines. We've looked at diagnostics. We're looking at things like long COVID. We've got studies running on long COVID, and it's having that sick population that really supports that kind of clinical trial base. So I think COVID has really demonstrated the importance of the patient population and the cohort to support faster, better, more effective recruitment.
I guess just the sort of recruitment bit, I sort of get that in a sense. I suppose I was intrigued then when now we know we can do things remotely and at distance. How do you kind of create the global village, I guess? But Elena, sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, no, if I may just come back to Catherine's point as well, from the funders' perspective that NIHR is as well, we definitely value research following patient need. And so this is pre-pandemic data, but we identified some clinical trials were placed in the golden triangle of Cambridge, Oxford, and London, whereas actually the patient population who would benefit from such trials, for example, in COPD, would be northeast of England. So we are really trying to, when we are allocating funding, we want them to justify why they're placing trials in certain areas and why do they want to do research if it's not the highest patient need. Just to comment on that. Yeah.
And Niall, I guess that sort of dovetails into your point about leveraging the research assets as well, because you can think of it as the sort of the tools to do the research with. And I guess that's where you do see this local patient need sometimes in clusters, but it gives you that insight. But I mean, do you want to expand a bit around how that research asset cluster, I guess, plays into it?
Yeah, I think I'll touch on a couple of things, and you know, I think what's been most effective in Alberta and in Calgary specifically is the creation of these innovation sandboxes in various areas of clinical research, because each one is different. You know, if you're doing a phase 2, you know, pharmaceutical trials, much different than doing clinical validation of a you know, precision cancer diagnostic trial. So I think what Calgary has done is created these platforms for industry to plug into with all the sort of agreements and all the back end of it already sort of done on a boilerplate, ready for industry to come and plug in, conduct their clinical research, leveraging the patient populations we have here, the rich data sets that we have here, and really make it a streamlined process for them to plug into these various different areas. And I think one unique sort of topic that Alberta is making a lot of progress on, and I think is on a pathway to greater use of this rich sort of health data, is in the development of what they're calling sort of synthetic data environments. So by sort of circumventing the privacy restraints around utilizing health data and for, you know, industrial research priorities, by creating these de-identified synthetic data environments for industry to come and plug into and utilize as a bit of a sandbox environment to really deploy and develop their AI and machine learning applications within that de-identified data set. I think that's also made it a lot more approachable from the public perception perspective by starting with those kinds of projects and demonstrating that it can be done in a safe and secure way, and sort of using that as a stepping stone to broader access to the health data databases that we have here in Alberta.
I suppose in that sense as well, it makes me think when you mention about the sort of sandboxes, really. I guess there was enormous pressure on regulators as well as on the sort of the sector and industry side. You know, you need to react quickly and maybe not have the depth of data or time frame to review or rules that you were sticking to before. So LaQuinta, when you looked at the trials you were helping run and coordinate, I mean, does a regulator, I mean, I guess a regulator is always going to have to follow a little bit where the knowledge of the industry and technology is, because they need enough proof to be able to regulate it. But is it more challenging to have regulators in an uncertain environment as well as the industry? I mean, it gives a great chance for disruption, but does that make it harder to engage with regulators sometimes?
Sometimes it does. And what we found, one of the biggest challenges that we find now that we're kind of, I mean, COVID's not over, but we're moving into more of a normal life. When it comes to decentralized clinical trial solutions, it hasn't quite made it on all of the regulators' desks. So there are a lot of loopholes and gray areas that now is getting a lot more attention. And what needs to happen, in my opinion, there were a lot of kind of graces given during COVID by regulators, because these were a lot of the solutions were not widely used, and they were trying to find a fix that would really support keeping research going, but also alleviating the pains that sites and hospitals were having. So there was a lot of grace given. But now what needs to happen is, I think that regulators need to work closely with the industry and with the companies like ours that are running these decentralized solutions to kind of come up with regulations that work best. Because what they're trying, what the fear is what they're trying to do is they're trying to put what we're doing into a box that doesn't really fit clinical research. So they're saying, okay, if you're in the home, is this home healthcare or is it clinical research, and can it not be both? And so the regulations don't always fit, especially when it comes to transfer of data, how we process data in a home to a site and things of that nature. So disruption is absolutely what's taking place, and it's what's needed in this space. But at the end of the day, regulations are needed as well, but we need to collaborate together with regulators to make it work best for research and for the patient. Because I think that a lot of times some of the regulations that are imposed do the opposite of what we're trying to do with like creating a space where patients have more choice and option and convenience for participating in clinical trials.
Yeah, I guess is that element of what's constructive disruption as opposed to just being disruptive. And
exactly.
I think there's a fine line for some of those.
Exactly.
You know, and I guess that I'm just conscious that, you know, there's so much we could talk about, but something else that came up early on, I guess, was all about having the right skills and the role of the local ecosystem and government and policies of providing the right labor for. You know, I mean, maybe Christoph, I'll come to you from your perspective. Do you see gaps in the skills settings? I guess we're having much more demand on digital skills than ever we had before in some of these roles. Is that a particular challenge, do you think, when you're?
I think the challenge for us is the how we can, and there's literally a trend since 2018 to reduce the time in the clinical trials. So the France and our country launched something to reduce that time 1 year ago, but it's something which is really accelerating now. So it's you know, disruption in the process. You can disrupt the process by being more efficient and save time, and finally include the patient way more earlier than something that was usually took 200 days about 6 months ago, and that at the end of the process that will take only 120 days to include the patient in the clinical trials. So this is a trend which is really accelerated and finally disrupted by the COVID situation. And I would say this is the first thing that I really see now, how easy it will be finally to collect data through the process that has to be way more, I don't know if it's straight to the point is a good explanation, but way more efficient and way more short to provide to any specialist finally the analysis and to act as soon as possible. And it's for me a huge and a massive step. You imagine if you go through 200 days to include the patient to 120 days, and this is really the trend and what local authorities are doing now in France.
Which seems like a really proactive role that the government can play in how you improve the kind of ecosystem for clinical trials. It's improving the efficiency so that Sandrine and LaQuinta can rock up and say, look, we want to do these things, but make it easier or quicker for us and more productive. So I guess I'm going to throw the same question to you, Niall, I think, in terms of what are the skills gaps or the labor pool challenges that you see?
Yeah, no, excellent question. I think where maybe a department where we do excel is in that digitization, and has really paid dividends during COVID, where our clinical research infrastructure was sort of had quite a foresight in digitizing all their operations and their document management systems and all that sort of stuff, which really didn't sort of negate the impact of COVID on operations, but really allowed them to kind of continue really interrupted through the pandemic. But I think maybe one of the skills gaps that we do have in our region, and I'm sure we're not alone in that, is just in that core regulatory expertise. So those regulatory specialists, which are such a hot commodity in any jurisdiction. And so I think the more that our local education infrastructure and education systems can pour some resources into developing those skill sets and recruiting from abroad when needed, I think that's probably one of the areas where we do need a little bit more I guess support, because of the volume that we are seeing in our early stage ventures coming through our programming that don't have that capacity internally, but need to look elsewhere for that support on a sort of consultancy basis. So I think that area is one of the ones that I think we do need to build up a little bit more in our region.
And Yelena.
If I may add to that as well, when I lived in Sweden, I was fascinated that X-rays of people who broken bones during nighttime were sent to Australia because of the time difference. There was somebody on call in Australia, and it was cheaper for a Swedish healthcare system to manage it like that rather than having somebody awake and on call in Sweden. And I think imaging is becoming such an huge part of research, and my background is in cancer research, and that's really true there. And I think we've touched upon data and digitalization and the role the AI can play in that, because radiographers and cancer screening and breast cancer screening and digital pathology, all of that is accelerating in the UK because there will be a lack of pathologists and radiographers to analyze all of that. And the government has generated this AI award to really help those innovations along. And I think the great thing there is that although many of those lead applicants in early phase development need to be from the UK, for solutions that are CE marked and could benefit UK patients, international companies can apply from anywhere for these grants.
Yeah, I guess that sort of flexing of a global expertise and capacity kind of feels even more doable now than even when we thought about it before, perhaps, in that sense. I mean, Catherine, you sort of sit there in a hotbed in Manchester of that cluster of research, training, innovation. Do you think, as a result of the pandemic, I guess I'm still thinking that a little bit, but also as clinical trials evolve and we communicate better, are we going to see more young kids want to get into STEM subjects? We talk a lot about STEM in the UK and needing people to study it, and they go off and study, I don't know, arts, for heaven's sake. Who would go to arts? But it's it's not for everyone, but it certainly is a challenge and has been here. Do you think this will help now that they sort of see the relevance of science?
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, one thing that COVID has done is raised the profile of clinical trials and medical research, and the importance of it to the wider population. So absolutely, that will drive interest in not only STEM subjects, but also in data analysis subjects. I mean, you were talking earlier about, and you asked earlier about skills gaps. I think what we're seeing because of the increased use of digitization is greater competition for digital skills. So, that's going to impact on every industry because every industry is digitizing. So it's that competition for digital skills that will probably be a critical factor. And equally, it's very specialist skills in bioinformatics. And so, this is where we're already seeing skills gaps, and, having universities that can almost like link those two subjects together to try and address those skills gaps is critical. And this is where Manchester has been quite ambitious and also been very proactive, because we've recognized that, there is this link between data and health technologies. And we've developed and we've recently launched the Christabel Pankhurst Institute for Health Technologies that brings together those AI and data skills with the scientific skills, specifically to focus on bringing through new technologies and getting them into the market more quickly, generating that evidence that's needed to get them through all the various stages of regulatory approval. So, in terms of, is there more interest in STEM subjects? Absolutely there is, but also it's, taking those new graduates in STEM subjects and directing them appropriately to fill those skills gaps that's probably the biggest issue.
And I guess this is, having said earlier on, we were chatting that we could go off a tangent. So I don't want this to be a tangent. I'm going to come to our Australian colleagues on the call, because as much as I was saying, we want more people doing STEM. Actually, I think one of the things the pandemic has shown us is that we need skills from multiple sectors in creative industries to communicate well what we need the general public to understand and do. So I'm just wondering, what does it look like when you sort of sat there in South Australia? Is STEM really popular anyway compared to the non-STEM subjects, or are they mingling well?
I do think that I agree with the previous speakers that I think what COVID has done now is really putting the emphasis back on science. Seeing politicians having advisors that are scientists, medical scientists, is, I think, putting the focus back on there, which I think will drive people in education, will drive the awareness of other jobs that are available also outside of academia. The whole clinical trial research doesn't just have to be academia. It's the industry, it is the service providers that play a role. I think everybody's got a broader understanding now. And also I think the breadth of expertise, there's anything from a chemist to nursing and medical staff to data management. It's such a breadth of skills that's required. And from a South Australian perspective, I think with the sector growing, we are working on creating a bigger workforce across all of that. So both through the universities as well as bringing highly skilled people into the country. And maybe, Sandrine, I don't know if you want to add something to that, but I think it's a massive workforce issue, and I do hope that the younger generation will take it on and go towards this, but I guess future will tell us.
Yeah, and I think it's only the start of it. I imagine that, people have now sort of invented the new ideas, and it's only going to go higher and higher, and the skill level is going to go up, and there's going to be more competition around the world of, soon we can analyze data from across the world. You don't have to be in that country anymore. And if you run a clinical trial here, you can analyze it from anywhere. So the skill set across the world is going to be, it's going to be interesting how that's going to develop. And I think it's only going to go more and more into the scientific and the STEM direction.
Tony, actually, one comment on that. The one thing we see in the opposite direction is manufacturing, I think, and that's probably a global thing as well, that a lot of manufacturing goes back to not doing it outside of the country, but bringing it back just because of the risk management of having something manufactured and not being able to bring it back in the country. So that's very interesting that it goes in both directions. So we definitely see that as well.
We're going to see this sort of pendulum of length of supply chains, I suspect. Everyone feels they want it close to home and under control, and then it'll go back, actually, you know what, this was far more effective and more resilient even sometimes to be somewhere else. But maybe it's about having locally sort of self-sustained ecosystems, but then you kind of knit those together in a well-connected way. Time always flies on these things, and I can only apologize it goes so quick. Not that I can do anything about it. But I'm going to ask each of you, just to wrap up, I'm going to ask you to put yourselves of having an exchange on Twitter where you're limited to 140 characters. And if you were having a one-on-one exchange with somebody, allowed one message each, what's your favorite question you'd get in 140 characters-ish? And what would be your response? So I'll start with Niall.
Get this. All right. So a question and an answer, Tony, is that what?
Yeah, what questions do you really like to get, and what's your answer to?
Oh boy. Okay. I think my question that I really would like to get is, I guess what makes the Calgary ecosystem, the best one, the best place in Canada, the best place in North America to scale a life sciences company. And I would, hark back to the efficiencies in being able to conduct clinical research, the cost effectiveness, the high quality of life that we are able to achieve here in this city, the exceptional talent pool in these advanced sort of STEM applications, and really the supportive, connective environment, the end-to-end concierge kind of service support. I think, as someone else mentioned, is really making our own jurisdiction a really conducive environment to scaling health companies.
Excellent. It's tough being the first one when I throw a question like that. Sandrine.
Yeah, well, very similar actually to Niall. I guess we got a lot of questions of why on earth would we come to Australia? It's so far away, and our response is that it's only as far as you make it. Yes, we can't travel, but you can't actually travel to your neighbour a couple of months ago. So now everything is sort of online, and we are your eyes and ears on the ground here. Due to the quality and the efficiencies here in Australia, it's a great place to come for clinical trials.
Excellent. Yelena.
Usually people are happy or surprised to hear all the support that it's available. So I guess my favorite question is, how can NIHR help? And the answer is come and talk to us at the conference. We offer a lot of free support to startups, to multinationals, to medical device companies, pharmaceuticals, and we can handhold with signposting throughout the innovation process.
Excellent. Laquinza.
I think that one of my favorite questions that I get is, what is one of the biggest challenges in clinical research or the space in clinical research, and what does your location have to offer that? And my answer is always, diversity in clinical trials is a huge problem facing our industry. And the US is so diverse, and there's so many great organizations that are present here that can help tackle that issue by knowing exactly where to go to reach minority communities, how to engage the sites in those communities, and how to bring research awareness to those communities. So that would be my question and answer.
Thank you. Christoph.
It's quite simple. The thing that I have in mind is the combination with people trapped finally in main capitals and in Paris, right in the middle of the walls that are too small. So the question is, where do you no longer want to live? Where do you no longer want to live? Because we are convinced about the fact that here in the south of France, what we can offer is a place where you can drive clinical trials with a population which is literally a melting pot, and in a place where you can have a proper and decent life, which is well connected and which offers everything related to the research, the HR expertise that companies are looking for, and the network of hospital, which is super connected from Italy to Spain. So, but the main question for me is where you finally know where you don't want to live forever and what kind of locations where you want to be, in fact, for the next potential lockdown. And by the way, Tony, 40% of the companies interested by the south of France are interested due to the lockdown now. And you can't imagine how attractive we are from people that are looking for a way to escape from Paris here in the south of France.
Wow, Sandra.
I guess my favorite question is when people ask, is the Australian advantage really true? It just sounds too good to be true. And I think we do hear that a lot of, really the fast system, the high quality data, and then an R&D tax incentive that gives you nearly half of it back. Yes, it is true. And on top of that, we can offer the whole ecosystem in a small state. So I think that's a bit special.
And Catherine.
Thank you.
Much like everybody else, it's around what makes Manchester so special in terms of, supporting clinical trials. And for me, it's the collaboration and the desire in the region to support our healthcare population, to make things better for people, that drives that collaboration. So, it's the fact that we have a receptive healthcare system, the support that we have for innovation, and the reputation that we already have as a testbed location to trial new technologies and new solutions as a result of our special infrastructure and our collaboration and integration in the region.
Excellent. I think that's everybody's had their Twitter exchange. I'm very grateful for you sharing your insights. What I take away from that discussion is really look for an ecosystem that's got the right attitude, I think, to innovation and curiosity and wanting to do things to be collaborative and open. A great place to live, considering you might have to live there through lockdown. I hadn't really factored that one in, but yeah, I guess that's a great one. And is well supported on the policy and government side as well, because every ecosystem needs that to create the pipeline of talent and opportunity. So thank you all for sharing your insights. I look forward to seeing some of you at the conference, I hope, at least virtually at the conference, and catching up in the not too distant future after that. So thank you for your time, and it's been an absolute pleasure.